Amani sat quietly in the center of her family's hut, surrounded by elders who spoke of duty and honor as if they were unbreakable chains. The air inside was thick with the scent of burning incense, a fragrance meant to ward off bad luck before a wedding. Her mother, her aunties, and the village's eldest women all sat around her, their voices weaving together a chorus of wisdom passed down through generations. "My daughter," her mother said, placing a warm but firm hand on Amani's knee, "a woman does not marry for herself. She marries for her family, for her ancestors, for her children yet to be born." The others nodded in agreement, murmuring blessings for her future union. Amani lowered her gaze, listening but not speaking. She had heard these words countless times. They were carved into the very foundation of her upbringing. Mzee Baraka, her soon-to-be husband, was a man of wealth and status. He had ensured her family's prosperity with gifts that would secure their comfort for years to come. Just the day before, his servants had arrived with golden bracelets, bolts of expensive fabric and cattle, a generous dowry that left her father beaming with pride. "Look at all he has given us," her mother had whispered excitedly. "This is a blessing, Amani. Not every girl is so fortunate." Fortunate. Amani repeated the word in her mind, but it felt foreign. How could she be fortunate when her heart recoiled at the thought of her future husband? Baraka was a man of power, his presence commanding respect wherever he went. His voice was deep and steady, his gaze sharp, always watching. Though he had never been unkind to her, there was something unsettling about him, an expectation in his eyes, a quiet certainty that she already belonged to him. The night before, during the betrothal ceremony, he had taken her hand in his large, calloused palm, studying her as though she were an object he had purchased at the market. "You will make a fine wife," he had said, his fingers squeezing hers just a little too tightly. Amani had forced a smile, but inside she felt as if she were sinking. Later, she had escaped to the riverbank, where she often went when she needed to clear her mind. It was there that she found Nia, her childhood friend, washing clothes in the cool water. Nia had always been the one person Amani could trust, the one who knew her thoughts before she spoke them. "You are quiet," Nia observed, wringing out a cloth. "Shouldn't a bride be glowing with happiness?" Amani sat beside her, hugging her knees. "I should be. But I am not." Nia glanced at her, then at the setting sun reflected in the water. "You do not love him." Amani shook her head, unable to speak the words aloud. Nia sighed, setting aside her work. "Then why go through with this?" Amani turned to her friend, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I have no choice. If I refuse, I will bring shame upon my family. My father will lose everything Baraka has given him. My mother will be humiliated. My brothers will struggle." Nia frowned. "And what of you, Amani? What will you lose?" Amani looked down at the water, watching as her reflection rippled and twisted. "Myself." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the gentle lapping of the river against the shore. Finally Nia spoke. "There is still time," she said carefully, "to change your fate." Amani's heart clenched at the thought. The idea of defying her family, of standing against the village's traditions, was terrifying. But a part of her, buried beneath years of obedience, whispered that perhaps Nia was right. Still, what could she do? Where would she go? Defying tradition was not just an act of rebellion, it was dangerous. It would make her an outcast, a disgrace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Amani knew that tomorrow she would have to face her fate. Whether she accepted it or fought against it was a choice only she could make. Amani walked along the riverbank, her bare feet sinking into the cool, damp earth. The evening air was thick with the scent of wildflowers and the distant smoke of cooking fires. The village behind her was alive with celebration. Drums echoed through the hills, marking the final days before her wedding. Yet she felt no joy, only a growing sense of suffocation. She knelt by the water's edge, dipping her fingers into the river. The ripples spread outward, distorting her reflection. Was this really to be her life? A future dictated not by love but by duty? She let out a soft sigh, her heart heavy with uncertainty. "You seem troubled," a voice said from the shadows. Amani gasped, her hand flying to her chest as she turned sharply. A man stood a few feet away, half hidden in the dim light of dusk. He was not from her village. His clothes, though simple, were unfamiliar, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence that set him apart from the men she knew. "I did not mean to startle you," he said, stepping closer. The fading sunlight cast a warm glow on his face, revealing strong features, dark eyes that held both curiosity and understanding. Amani hesitated. "Who are you?" "I am Kato," he replied, lowering himself onto a nearby rock. I arrived in your village this morning. I travel from place to place hunting, trading. And you? She hesitated. I am Amani. Kato studied her for a moment before speaking again. You do not look like a woman preparing for a wedding. Shouldn't you be celebrating? Amani looked away. Not all brides look forward to their weddings. Kato's gaze softened. Then why agree to it? She let out a hollow laugh. Because I have no choice. He tilted his head. There is always a choice. Amani turned to him, narrowing her eyes. Not in my world. Here we do what is expected. We obey. We do not question. Kato leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. I have traveled to many villages, Amani. I have seen places where women choose their husbands. Where love is not dictated by wealth or duty, but by the heart. Amani stared at him, a strange emotion stirring inside her. She had never met a man who spoke like this. In her village, such thoughts were unheard of, dangerous even. That is not our way, she whispered. Perhaps your way should change, he said simply. For a moment they sat in silence, the river murmuring between them. Amani felt something she had not felt in a long time, hope. The possibility of another life, one where she was free to choose. Before she could speak, distant voices interrupted them. She turned toward the village and saw a few women approaching, their silhouettes illuminated by the flickering glow of torches. If they saw her with Kato, the rumors would spread like wildfire. You should go, she said quickly, standing up. Kato rose as well, his gaze steady. Will I see you again? Amani hesitated. I don't know. She turned and hurried back toward the village, her heart pounding. Behind her, Kato remained by the river, watching as she disappeared into the night. By morning, the whispers had already begun. I heard she was speaking with a stranger by the river, one woman murmured at the marketplace. A hunter from another village, another added, shaking her head. She is promised to Mzee Baraka. This is shameful. The gossip spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of the village elders and, more importantly, Mzee Baraka himself. By midday, Amani was summoned to her father's hut. When she stepped inside, her father's face was grim. Her mother stood beside him, her hands wringing anxiously. And across from them, seated on a wooden stool, was Mzee Baraka. Amani's stomach clenched. You have been seen with a stranger, her father said, his voice heavy with disapproval. Is this true? Amani hesitated. Lying would only make things worse. Yes. Baraka's eyes darkened. Do you understand the disgrace you bring upon your family? Upon me? I did nothing wrong, Amani replied, her voice firmer than she expected. I spoke with him. That is all. Her father let out a frustrated sigh. That is all? Do you not see how it looks? A woman promised to one man should not be seen entertaining another. Baraka leaned forward, his fingers drumming against his knee. If this happens again, there will be consequences. Amani met his gaze, something shifting inside her. Fear, yes, but also defiance. I understand. Baraka stood, adjusting his elaborate robes. See that you do. He turned to her father. Keep her in line. With that, he strode out of the hut, leaving an uneasy silence in his wake. Amani's mother stepped forward, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Please, Amani. Do not anger him. He is a powerful man. Amani swallowed, nodding. But inside she felt something new, a quiet, growing rebellion. She had met Kato only once, but already, he had planted a seed of doubt in her heart. A seed that, despite the warnings, was beginning to take root. Amani sat outside her family's hut, absently running her fingers over the beaded bracelet on her wrist. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows over the village. Smoke curled into the sky from the cooking fires, and the rhythmic beat of distant drums reminded her that her wedding was drawing nearer. She had spent years preparing for this moment, knowing it was her duty to marry Mzee Baraka. Yet, since her encounter with Kato by the river, something inside her had shifted. Doubt had taken root, growing stronger with each passing day. Her mother emerged from the hut, her face lined with worry. She sat beside Amani, pulling her shawl tightly around her shoulders. You have been distant, her mother said softly. I see the storm in your heart. Amani hesitated. She had always been close to her mother, but there were things she could not say. She could not confess that when she thought of her future, it was not Baraka she saw beside her, but Kato. Her mother sighed, taking Amani's hand in hers. My child, I know this marriage is not what you dreamed of. But dreams are not what feed a family. Dreams do not bring honor. Amani looked up, searching her mother's face. What about happiness? Her mother's expression faltered. Happiness is a luxury, Amani. A woman's duty is to her family. You must not bring shame upon us. Amani lowered her gaze. The weight of expectation pressed heavily on her, suffocating. Meanwhile, in another part of the village, Mzee Baraka sat in his grand hut, deep in thought. He had heard the rumors, whispers of Amani speaking with the young hunter. He had noticed the way her gaze had changed, the hesitation in her steps when he visited. Baraka was not a man who accepted defiance lightly. He had worked hard to amass his wealth and status, and no mere wanderer would threaten what was rightfully his. He gestured for one of his attendants to come closer. Find out everything you can about this Kato. I want to know where he sleeps, who he speaks to. The attendant bowed and hurried away. Baraka narrowed his eyes. He would not allow a hunter to challenge him. The village elders convened the next day in the open courtyard beneath the great baobab tree. Men with long graying beards sat in a circle, their expressions solemn. Amani was summoned before them, standing in the center with her father by her side. We have heard troubling things, the eldest among them said. A promised bride wandering too freely, speaking with strangers. Do you deny it? Amani swallowed, feeling the weight of their judgment. I do not deny it, she said carefully. But I have done nothing wrong. Murmurs rippled through the gathering. You are to be Mzee Baraka's wife, another elder said sternly. It is not for you to question tradition. Amani's father cleared his throat. She understands her duty. His voice was firm, but Amani could hear the strain beneath it. One of the elders studied her closely. Do you doubt the wisdom of our ways, child? Amani hesitated. She had spent her whole life accepting that tradition was unbreakable, that she had no say in her future. But now, she opened her mouth then closed it. Speak, another elder urged. She took a deep breath. I only wish to understand. Shouldn't a woman's heart matter in a marriage? A hush fell over the gathering. Amani's father shot her a warning look. The eldest elder finally spoke. A woman's heart is her strength. But duty comes first. If every woman chose her own path, what would become of our ways? Tradition is what holds our people together. Amani clenched her fists. The discussion is over, another elder declared. Your wedding will proceed as planned. Amani's father bowed, signaling for her to do the same. She followed his lead, her heart sinking. That night, desperate for guidance, Amani went to see the oldest woman in the village, Nyoka. The wise woman lived on the outskirts, her hut surrounded by dried herbs and charms made of bone and feathers. Nyoka was sitting by the fire when Amani arrived, her eyes half closed as though she had been expecting her. You come seeking answers, Nyoka said before Amani could speak. Amani knelt before her. I do not know what to do. Nyoka's gaze was piercing. The river does not choose its path. It follows where the earth leads it. Are you the river, Amani? Or will you carve your own way? Amani frowned. I do not understand. The old woman chuckled. You already do. Amani hesitated. If I refuse Baraka, I will bring shame to my family. But if I marry him, I will lose myself. Nyoka tossed some dried leaves into the fire. The flames crackled, sending a swirl of scented smoke into the air. The spirits do not speak of shame or duty. They speak of balance, of fate. Amani leaned forward. And what is my fate? Nyoka studied her for a long moment. Then she said, Fate has already begun its work. The question is not whether it will happen but whether you will embrace it, or fight against it. Amani's breath caught. She thought of Kato, his words, his quiet strength. Was he part of this fate? Nyoka smiled knowingly. The heart and duty are not always enemies, child. Sometimes they can walk the same path. Amani swallowed, feeling as though a door had opened before her. For the first time she saw a choice before her, not just duty or love but the possibility of both. She left Nyoka's hut with her mind made up. The time for fear was over. It was time to decide her own fate. The village was in turmoil. At dawn, the panicked cries of farmers had shattered the morning peace as they discovered the destruction left behind. Goats lay torn apart, their blood staining the earth, and chickens had vanished without a trace. It was the third attack in a week. People gathered in the village square, their voices rising in fear and frustration. The elders murmured among themselves while farmers gestured angrily, demanding action. Mzee Baraka stood at the center of the gathering, his arms crossed over his richly embroidered robes. "This is a problem of strength and resources," he declared. "And I have both." He turned to the crowd. "I will offer a great reward to the man who slays this beast, cattle, gold, whatever he wishes. The village needs a protector, and only a man of power can handle such a task." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Young men exchanged uneasy glances, but none stepped forward. The beast was said to be enormous, with eyes that gleamed like fire in the night. It moved like a shadow, striking swiftly and leaving only terror in its wake. Amani watched from the edge of the gathering, her heart pounding. She could see how Baraka's words swayed the villagers. He was framing himself as their savior, the only man capable of providing safety. But she knew that wealth alone did not make a man strong. Then a voice rang out. "I will go." The crowd parted as Kato stepped forward. His stance was steady, his expression unwavering. A hush fell over the villagers as they took in the sight of him. A man without land, without wealth, yet standing with the confidence of a warrior. Mzee Baraka's expression darkened. "You," he scoffed. "A hunter with nothing to his name?" Kato met his gaze without flinching. "Strength is not measured by gold, nor is courage bought with cattle. If this beast threatens the village, then I will stop it." Amani's breath caught. She had seen Kato's quiet strength before, but now the entire village was witnessing it. He did not seek praise or rewards, only the chance to prove himself. The elders exchanged glances. One of them, a man with deep lines of wisdom on his face, nodded. "Very well," he said. "If you wish to take on this task, you may. But be warned, this is no ordinary creature. Many hunters have tried and failed." "I do not fear failure," Kato replied. That night, as the village settled into uneasy silence, Amani found herself standing near Kato's small hut. She hesitated before stepping forward. "You shouldn't go alone," she said softly. Kato turned, his eyes warm despite the cool night air. "I must." "A warrior does not wait for others to fight his battles." Amani looked down. "I believe in you." The words left her lips before she could stop them. A flicker of something passed across Kato's face, but he only nodded. "Then I will not fail." As he disappeared into the night, Amani watched him go, her heart pounding with something she could not name. Fate was moving and she could only pray that it would lead him back to her, alive. The night was eerily silent as Kato moved through the dense undergrowth, his spear gripped firmly in his hand. The moon cast long shadows over the wilderness, the only sound being the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. He had been tracking the beast for hours, following the deep claw marks on tree trunks and the faint traces of blood left behind by its previous kills. He crouched low, examining the ground beneath him. The prints were fresh, still deep in the damp soil. The creature was close. He steadied his breathing, his senses heightened. This was not just about slaying a beast, it was about proving his worth, not just to the village but to himself and perhaps to Amani. A low growl rumbled through the trees and Kato froze. His grip on the spear tightened. The beast emerged from the darkness, its glowing eyes locking onto him. It was massive, larger than any predator he had ever seen. Its fur was matted with dirt and blood, its claws curved like sharpened daggers. The two faced each other, neither moving, both waiting for the right moment. Then the beast lunged. Kato rolled to the side just in time, feeling the wind of its powerful swipe rush past him. He struck with his spear, but the creature twisted, the sharp point grazing its thick hide instead of piercing it. The beast roared in fury, swiping again, this time knocking Kato off balance. He crashed into the dirt, pain shooting through his shoulder. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself up just as the beast charged again. Kato leaped, dodging the attack and landing on his feet. He had faced many dangers before, but this was unlike anything he had ever battled. He needed to think fast. He spotted a fallen tree nearby, its trunk thick and sturdy. An idea formed in his mind. He ran toward it, knowing the beast would follow. As expected, the creature charged after him, blinded by rage. At the last second, Kato vaulted over the trunk, landing smoothly on the other side. The beast tried to stop, but its massive size worked against it. It crashed into the trunk, momentarily stunned. This was his chance. Summoning all his strength, Kato drove his spear into the beast's exposed side. The creature let out a deafening roar, thrashing wildly. Kato held on, pushing the weapon deeper until he felt the spearhead pierce through its heart. The beast staggered, its powerful body shuddering before finally collapsing. The forest fell silent once more. Panting, Kato stepped back, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He had done it. The village would no longer live in fear. By the time he returned, dragging the slain creature behind him, The villagers were already awake, waiting anxiously. When they saw him emerging from the darkness, victorious, a collective gasp echoed through the crowd. "He did it," someone whispered. And then cheers erupted. People rushed forward, chanting his name, their voices filled with awe and gratitude. The elders, who had once dismissed him as an outsider, looked at him with newfound respect. Mothers clutched their children, thanking him for protecting their village. Amani stood at the front of the crowd, her eyes locked onto him. Relief washed over her face, followed by something deeper, something she could not yet put into words. But not everyone was pleased. Mzee Baraka stood at the back, his expression dark. He refused to clap, refused to acknowledge what had just happened. Instead, he stepped forward, his voice cutting through the celebration. "This proves nothing," he said coldly. "A warrior is not a provider. Strength fades. But wealth lasts forever." The villagers fell silent, turning to look between Baraka and Kato. Amani's father, who had always supported the match with Baraka, hesitated. He had always believed that a man's ability to provide was the most important thing in a marriage. But as he looked at Kato, standing tall, fearless, having risked his life for their village, he felt something shift inside him. For the first time he wondered if courage and heart mattered more than gold. The elders exchanged glances, their rigid beliefs beginning to waver. Perhaps tradition was not as unshakable as they once thought. The sun hung high in the vast African sky, casting golden rays over the bustling village of Luhaya. Birds chirped in the trees, and the scent of roasting meat and freshly pounded spices filled the air. The entire village was alive with excitement, preparing for one of the grandest weddings in recent memory. Drummers practiced their rhythms, dancers rehearsed their movements, and women wove intricate patterns into baskets filled with gifts for the bride. Everywhere there was laughter and joy. At the heart of these preparations stood Amani, a young woman whose beauty was said to rival the glow of the morning sun. Clad in rich fabrics embroidered with gold and deep red, she was every bit the perfect bride. But beneath the layers of finery, her heart was restless. Today should have been the happiest day of her life, yet an invisible weight pressed against her chest. She knew what was expected of her. In her village, tradition was everything. Marriages were arranged not for love, but for status, security, and prosperity. Her family had chosen for her Mzee Baraka, a man of great wealth and influence. He was respected, powerful, and generous, having showered her family with gifts of cattle, fabrics, and even land. It was an honor to be his wife, at least that was what everyone told her. But when Amani looked at Mzee Baraka, she did not see love. She saw a man more than twice her age, with tired eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. Her mother had reminded her time and time again that love was not the foundation of marriage, duty was. Amani had tried to accept this, had tried to convince herself that she was simply nervous, that these feelings of unease would pass. But deep down, something inside her whispered that this was not the path meant for her. As the preparations continued, another figure entered the village unnoticed by most. A traveler, his clothes dusty from the road, moved through the crowd with a quiet confidence. His name was Kato, and though he was not from Luhaya, his presence carried the weight of a man who had seen much and learned from it. He was lean and strong, his sharp eyes observing everything with quiet intensity. He paused for a moment near the village square, where the wedding decorations were being arranged. The laughter, the music, the excitement, it was all familiar yet foreign to him. Something about this wedding, about this village, held his attention longer than it should have. A sudden gust of wind sent flower petals swirling into the air, and Kato's gaze shifted toward the bride-to-be. Amani stood among the women, her face a picture of elegance and grace. But beneath her poise he saw something else, hesitation, uncertainty. For just a moment, their eyes met across the distance. And though they were strangers, a silent understanding passed between them. Neither of them knew it yet, but fate had begun to weave its own story. Mzee Baraka sat in his grand hut, his fists clenched in rage. The cheers for Kato still echoed in his ears, each one a wound to his pride. He had spent years building his status, ensuring that he was the most respected man in the village. But now, a mere traveler and outsider had stolen the spotlight. Worse still, he had seen the way Amani had looked at Kato. Her admiration had been undeniable. No, he would not allow this. The next morning, Baraka gathered his most loyal allies, men who had benefited from his wealth, who owed him favors. "That man is dangerous," he said, his voice low and seething. "He has bewitched the villagers with his false heroics. If we do not act, he will turn them against our traditions. His allies nodded, eager to please him. What do you propose, Mzee? One asked. Baraka smirked. We remove him before it's too late. By midday, a crowd had gathered in the village square. The council elders sat in a semicircle, their faces serious. Kato stood before them, his posture firm but calm. He had been summoned suddenly, accused of dishonorable intentions. A hush fell over the crowd as Mzee Baraka stepped forward. This man, Baraka declared, his voice thick with accusation, has no respect for our customs. He slithers into our village, stirs rebellion in the hearts of our women, and undermines the traditions that have held us together for generations. Murmurs rippled through the villagers. Baraka continued, his gaze landing on Amani. He seeks to turn our daughters against us, to fill their heads with foolish dreams. We cannot allow such corruption to take root. Kato remained silent, his jaw tight. He knew this was not just about him, it was about power, about control. One of the elders turned to Kato. What do you say to these accusations? Kato lifted his head, his voice steady. I came to this village with no ill intentions. I did not ask for admiration. I did not ask for anyone to question their ways. If the people see something in me, it is because they have chosen to. Not because I have tricked them. A few villagers nodded in agreement, but Baraka scoffed. And yet you have disrupted our peace. You have made our women think they can choose their own fate, when fate was chosen for them at birth. For a moment there was silence. Then, unexpectedly, Amani stepped forward. Enough. All eyes turned to her. It was rare for a woman to speak in a council gathering, rarer still for her to interrupt a man like Baraka. Her heart pounded, but she did not waver. You speak of fate, Mzee Baraka. But whose fate? Yours? My father's? Or mine? A gasp rippled through the crowd. You claim Kato has bewitched me, but the truth is, I have only now begun to see clearly. She turned to the elders. For too long we have mistaken obedience for honor. A woman should not be forced into a marriage she does not want. And a man should not be punished simply for existing. Baraka's face darkened. You are a foolish girl who knows nothing of the world. Amani lifted her chin. Perhaps. But I know this. If you exile Kato for challenging tradition, then you must exile me as well. Because I will not stand beside a man I do not love. The village erupted in shocked whispers. The elders glanced at one another, their expressions unreadable. Some were unsettled by Amani's defiance, but others, especially the younger ones, seemed to be reconsidering their long-held beliefs. Baraka turned to Amani's father, expecting him to intervene. But the older man hesitated. For the first time he did not know what to say. The council fell into murmurs, deliberating. This was no longer just about Kato. It was about the future of their traditions. The village waited with bated breath. The village square had never been so silent. The weight of Amani's words hung in the air like a storm about to break. The council elders sat in their usual places, their lined faces betraying uncertainty. Mzee Baraka, still seething from the public humiliation of the council meeting, stood rigidly before them, his hands clenched into fists. He had called for this final gathering, determined to put an end to Amani's rebellion once and for all. Amani, standing tall in the center of the crowd, felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her. Her father had refused to look at her since she had openly defied Baraka. Her mother stood at a distance, wringing her hands anxiously. Even Nia, her childhood friend, watched her with both awe and fear. No woman had ever done what Amani was about to do. One of the elder council members cleared his throat. Amani, daughter of Jabari, you have spoken boldly. But now you must choose. Will you honor the path set before you as tradition demands, or will you bring shame upon your family and your ancestors? Amani took a deep breath. I choose neither, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. I choose my own path. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Baraka's face darkened with fury. Enough of this foolishness, he bellowed. A woman's duty is to honor her family, not to indulge in childish dreams. You have already disgraced yourself by speaking out. Do not make it worse. Amani turned to him, meeting his glare without fear. Tell me, Mzee Baraka, what is honor? Is it obedience without question? Is it wealth without love? Is it silencing the voices of those who wish for something more? Baraka scoffed. Honor is knowing your place. She took a step forward. Then perhaps it is time that our places change. A ripple of murmurs spread among the villagers. Some nodded, others whispered, uncertain but intrigued. One of the elders, a wise old man named Kwame, studied Amani carefully. "You speak as if love is more important than duty," he said. "I speak as if love and duty should walk together," Amani replied. "What kind of future do we build if our daughters are given away like cattle? Should we not value a man's heart and bravery over his gold? Should we not allow a woman to choose a husband she respects, rather than one she fears?" The elders exchanged uneasy glances. No one had ever questioned the custom so openly before. Baraka's patience snapped. "Enough of this madness. I have given your family wealth beyond measure. I will not be humiliated by a mere girl. You will marry me, Amani, whether you like it or not." Amani raised her chin. "No, I will not." The words rang out, final and unshakable. A heavy silence followed. Then from the back of the crowd, a voice spoke up. "She is right." Heads turned as an older woman, one of the village mothers, stepped forward. "We have forced our daughters to obey without question for too long. We have taught them that their worth is measured by the wealth they bring through marriage. Perhaps it is time we listened instead." Another voice joined in. "Kato proved himself a man of courage. Why should we dismiss him simply because he was not born into wealth?" The murmurs grew louder. Some villagers still clung to tradition, but many, especially the younger ones, were beginning to see the truth in Amani's words. Baraka's face burned with anger. He turned to the council. "You will not allow this, will you? This girl's foolishness threatens everything we stand for." But the elders were silent, lost in thought. Amani's father finally spoke. His voice was heavy with conflict, but there was something new in it: understanding. "Mzee Baraka, you have been generous to our family," he said slowly. "But I will not force my daughter into a marriage that she does not want." Baraka staggered back as if struck. The decision was made. Amani's mother, tears in her eyes, stepped forward and took her daughter's hands. "You have always been strong, my child," she whispered. "Perhaps stronger than we ever knew." Amani smiled, relief washing over her like a river after a drought. Baraka, his power slipping through his fingers, let out a bitter laugh. "You will regret this," he sneered. "Without my wealth your family will struggle. And when the village falls into ruin because of this foolishness, remember that it was you who destroyed it." With that, he turned and stormed away, leaving behind the village he had once ruled with wealth and arrogance. As his figure disappeared into the distance, the villagers stood in stunned silence. Then one by one they turned to Amani, not with scorn but with admiration. For the first time in their history, a woman had stood up and changed the course of tradition. And the world did not end. It simply changed. The dust had barely settled from Baraka's departure when the village slowly began to adjust to a new reality. Change was never easy, but Amani had chosen her own destiny, and now she and Kato had to prove that love could be just as strong a foundation as tradition. For the first time in her life, Amani felt free. No longer weighed down by duty, she walked through the village with her head held high, her heart full of hope. But she knew that her journey was not yet over. Though the elders had allowed her to choose, acceptance would take time. Many in the village still whispered behind her back, uncertain if defying tradition was truly the right path. Kato, ever patient and determined, understood this better than anyone. He had won the villagers' respect through his bravery in slaying the beast, but he was still an outsider. If he and Amani were to build a future here, they had to earn their place, not through words but through action. The first step was proving that Kato could contribute to the village. He was not a wealthy man like Baraka, but he was strong and resourceful. He joined the hunters, tracking game in the surrounding forests, ensuring that no family went hungry. He worked alongside the farmers, learning their ways and sharing techniques he had picked up from his travels. Slowly, the people began to see him not as a stranger, but as one of their own. Amani too played her part. No longer confined to the expectations of a submissive bride, she found her own voice in the village. She worked with the women to improve daily life, organizing efforts to store grain for times of drought, teaching younger girls that they could be more than just wives and mothers. She did not try to erase tradition, only to reshape it into something more, just something that gave people choice. Her father, once so adamant about the marriage to Baraka, watched her with a mixture of pride and hesitation. He saw how the village was beginning to change, how Amani and Kato were not just taking from it but giving back in ways he had never imagined. One evening he called Amani to sit with him by the fire. The glow of the flames danced in his tired eyes as he spoke. "You have always been strong-willed, Amani," he said. "I feared it would bring dishonor upon us. But now, I see that perhaps I was wrong." Amani's heart swelled with emotion. "I never meant to dishonor you, Baba," she said softly. I only wanted to choose a life where I could be happy and still bring honor to our family in my own way." Her father sighed, nodding slowly. "And are you happy?" Amani glanced across the fire to where Kato sat, speaking with the hunters, his laughter deep and warm. She turned back to her father, her eyes shining. "Yes," she said. "More than I ever thought possible." A small, tired smile played at the corners of her father's lips. "Then perhaps that is enough." The true turning point came during the village's harvest festival. It was a time of celebration, where the people gathered to give thanks for the year's bounty. The elders had debated whether Amani and Kato should be allowed to take part in the festivities as an official couple. But ultimately, tradition had already been shaken. There was no stopping the change now. Under the vast African sky, filled with stars as bright as diamonds, Amani and Kato stood before the village, their hands clasped together. The drums beat a steady rhythm and the people watched, waiting to see what would happen. Then, to everyone's surprise, Amani's mother stepped forward. She held a small woven bracelet, one she had made when Amani was a child. She took her daughter's hand and tied it gently around her wrist. "May your love be as strong as this bond," she whispered. Amani's breath caught in her throat. It was a mother's blessing, the first true acceptance of her choice. One by one, others followed. The village mothers, the hunters, even the younger girls who had watched Amani's defiance with wide eyes. They did not all speak, but their gestures said enough. The final sign of acceptance came when the elders themselves stood. "Fate has indeed chosen a different path," Kwame, the wisest among them, said. "Perhaps it is time we listen." That night, as the drums carried their rhythm into the wind and the village danced under the stars, Amani knew they had done more than just win approval. They had changed the course of the village's future. Kato pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "We did it," he murmured. Amani smiled, feeling the warmth of his embrace. "No," she whispered. "Fate did." Years passed, and the story of Amani and Kato became more than just a tale whispered among the village elders. It became legend. What had once been an act of defiance transformed into a symbol of hope. Parents still arranged marriages, but now, for the first time, the voices of their daughters and sons were considered. The village elders no longer viewed tradition as an unmovable force but as something that could evolve while still holding onto its roots. Amani and Kato built their home near the great baobab tree, the same one where they had first spoken under the moonlight. It became a place of gathering where villagers sought advice, where young women came to confide their fears, and where men came to understand what it meant to love not just out of duty but out of choice. Kato, once an outsider, was now a respected leader among the hunters. He trained the young men not only in the ways of tracking and survival but in the wisdom of patience and understanding. He reminded them that strength was not measured in wealth or brute force, but in courage and kindness. Amani too had found her purpose. She became the heart of the village's women, guiding them to see that their worth was more than the dowries their fathers could receive. She encouraged them to dream beyond what had always been done, to believe in love, in honor, and in a future they could help shape. When their first child was born, a daughter with eyes as fierce as her mother's and a spirit as steady as her father's, the village gathered to celebrate. The elders who had once tried to silence Amani's voice, now spoke of fate and how it had led them all to a better path. "She will grow to be strong," Kwame, the eldest of the council, said as he looked upon the baby. "She will know her own heart and she will be free to follow it." Amani held her daughter close, her heart full. She had fought for this moment, not just for herself but for every girl who would come after her. As the years passed, Amani and Kato's love never wavered. It became the foundation of the village's new way of life. Young men and women spoke their vows beneath the baobab tree, choosing love and respect over obligation. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Amani and Kato sat side by side, watching their children play. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had chosen a different path?" Amani asked, her fingers laced with Kato's. Kato smiled, his eyes filled with the same warmth that had captivated her all those years ago. "No," he said softly, "because fate always knew where we belonged." And so, their story lived on, not just in their hearts but in the hearts of every generation that followed. A story of love, of courage, and of the power to choose one's own destiny.